Achieving catharsis through the murder fantasy. I'd be willing to bet that every single one of you in this room has at one point had this all-consuming fantasy of killing somebody in cold blood. Probably because they wronged you, but even if not, just for any reason at all. And you have thought at one point, just killing somebody, and then you've thought about how you would do it, and how you would go about it, exactly what you would do to end this person's life. I guarantee that every single one of you at one point has done this. Maybe you don't remember it. Maybe you don't want to remember it because you think it's dark, or bad, or that you're an awful, savage person for thinking it, but I disagree. What I think of the murder fantasy is that you can achieve a sort of catharsis from it. I know I did. A little bit of backstory. First time I ever had one of these was I just ended a relationship with a woman. 2 years I was in a relationship with this woman. 2 years I loved her unconditionally, and all it took to end it was 3 weeks and a sob story from a pathological liar. And so what happened is, essentially, this man stole this woman out from under my nose. And I was too stupid to notice. I was too stupid to see what he was doing. And this got worse and worse while I was at home, and then I left for college, and all she did was post on Twitter and Facebook about him, and that was all she did. It was all about him. And then Wednesday of the first week of the term, she posted a picture of her with a cute little smile. She's a beautiful woman, and a bouquet of daisies he left for her. Daisies are her favorite flower, and when I saw that, I laid on the floor of my bedroom and I wept. I wept until I physically couldn't cry no longer, and then I went to the read-through of the government inspector, and I had to sit in there and act like I wasn't crushed, holding back tears, and be funny. Not just not break down, but also be funny. It had to be funny, and it hurt. It hurt. The next day I finally ended the relationship because she couldn't do it. She didn't want to feel bad about herself, so she didn't do it. I found out later that, I started thinking about it, that she was a manipulative, awful woman who was turning into her mother, who was a manipulative cunt. Pardon my language, I hope I don't offend you, but if I found out that I was better off, and after a couple of days I was fine. I had no more hatred toward her, and feel bad about her anymore. I had moved on, and she had moved on, and I had to move on too, but the guy, this festering pus rag of a man who would do this. I just felt absolute hatred for him. I had nothing but hatred in my heart for this bastard. And what happened was I was lying in my bed, and I had a very vivid thought that I would be home, and I had a gun, and I would walk up to his door. I'd been to his house a lot, at least I hung out there with a lot of people. And I would walk up to his door, and I would peer through the blinds. His room was right there, and I'd see him. He'd be sitting at his computer, and he'd be playing probably Skyrim or a Star Wars game, because that's what he was into. He'd probably be playing one of those. I know I'd knock on the door and peer through the blinds, and I would see him come to the door from his computer, and I'd be waiting, and he would open the door and say, "Hello, Declan," and I would shoot him in the kneecaps, and he would fall to the ground screaming in pain, and I would fire 3 more times into his stomach. He would start to bleed. Maybe the rest of his family would be home, and they'd come out, and they'd be screaming in terror, and I'd tell them to back off because I didn't want to shoot them, because they hadn't wronged me. And I wouldn't shoot him again, but I'd take him by the shirt, and I would pull him into the doorway. I would slam the door once or twice on his head. I wouldn't want to kill him, and I want to give him a nice headache, while he would bleed out there on his doorstep, and then I would walk away like nothing in the world. And then I had another one. About a day later, I would hang out with him. A lot of friends at the house. That I had a fantasy that I would be home and they'd be together because they were, and I would have forgiven them. I'd be the bigger man, and I'd come over, and we'd be watching Disney movies, and we'd be drinking, and a lot of us were underage, but kids, and they'd be getting nice and drunk, have a nice buzz going, because she liked to drink, and he loved to drink, so they'd be there. They'd have a nice buzz going. They'd be a little tipsy. They'd be over there, and they'd be cuddling on the couch. They'd be nuzzling, maybe nibbling on her ear, maybe nibbling on his ear. I know she likes to do that and have that done to her. You learn these things over 2 years. And so I might be a couple in, but I wouldn't get to the point where I couldn't function normally. And I would grab a knife from the knife block in his kitchen, right where it is. I would go to his kitchen a lot, and I would stab him right in his chest, and I'd pull it out, and he'd start to bleed. And she'd scream in terror, and he'd be sitting there with the wound in his chest, and I'd stab him again, and I'd stab him again, and I'd stab him, and I'd stab him again, and I'd leave the knife in him, and they'd be gasping in terror, and she'd be over there. Maybe she'd have a bit of blood on her, and I wouldn't hurt her, because even though she's an awful person, I saw, it was something, in a movie I saw that, the worst thing about loving someone is you never get to find out how unlovable they are, which is bleak, but it worked in this situation. And then screaming in terror, and I'd pull the knife and wipe the blood off on his face and stab him right in his chest, and I would turn around and I'd grab a bottle of vodka and I would walk out the door like nothing had happened. And you know what? After a couple of days of that, I had no more hatred toward him. I couldn't. I tried to be mad at him. I tried to hate him, but I couldn't. I just couldn't do it. I believe that through thoughts of savagery and animalistic brutality, that I achieved a sort of catharsis. That I had found a recovery through letting my mind be free and letting me have my little power fantasy, because I wouldn't do it. I would never do it. But to let myself go there for just a little while, I don't know exactly what sort of help it gave me, but it did help. And I'm thinking it was just something to give myself, help me get through a situation where I was powerless, where there was nothing I could do. And it allowed me to go to that extreme and think about just the full extent of what I could do. And then, once I've explored that, once I've worked that through in my mind and I've reached that conclusion, well then, you know, what else is there for me to do on the issue? I'm done dwelling on it. I've killed the man twice. So why not move on, leave him be? I've got bigger things to worry about. I've done my worrying. I've maximized my worrying. I've maximized my dwelling on it. I have nothing left to do on that front. So might as well forget about it. And that's what happened. And I'm feeling great. I'm feeling like a new man, honestly, and I have to imagine that some of that came from the fact that in my mind, I savagely murdered a man. And having done that, there was nothing more to say on the subject. And now I'm happy.